Canadians are watching right now. They're watching to see that our leadership collectively is able to meet this moment, is able to step up, is able to be there to say, this is Canada, we got this, and this is how we're going to do it.
This is about Canada being ambitious. This is about Canada being confident. This is about Canada winning in the economy of the 21st century.
The tangible results in the next 30 days for us to reduce red tape, for us to eliminate barriers to trade, and for us to build a domestic economy without going through Donald Trump is here and is now.
All right, and there you have it. What can Canada do quickly to insulate and protect against threats, economic and verbal, coming from President Trump, and the very real possibility that in early March we will be in a trade war? It's the challenge that is facing every government nationwide, federal, provincial, municipal. There are a lot of ideas, but 3.5 weeks is a very tight timeline. Let's bring in the front bench: Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, Najoud Al-Malisi. Najoud, I want to start with you here. What needs to happen in your mind?
To get rid of internal trade barriers?
Absolutely. Whatever needs to happen, all the different strategies, yes.
Well, I think that right now there's clearly momentum for change, for political leaders to do something. And so, for example, on internal trade barriers, we're in a moment where premiers are all talking about this in unison. We are talking about building pipelines potentially. You know, the Quebec government suggesting that it would be open to a project of LNG between Alberta to Quebec. And so there is clearly a window of opportunity that the Prime Minister has referred to as well to take action. The reality is that the barriers to growing Canada's economy have been known for years, and it will take a willingness to potentially challenge interest groups on some of these points. And so it's easy to become a little bit skeptical of how much governments will actually accomplish during this time, given the short time frame until tariffs could come into place, but also because of some comments they've made, such as, you know, parties suggesting we're not interested in reconsidering supply management, which controls the production of things like dairy. And so I guess really time will tell if we'll see real political change on some of these big economic issues, regulatory burdens in the country. But you can be sure that nothing is going to be monumentally different in 30 days, which is the deadline that the president has given us.
And Sabrina, because of the size of the U.S. economy, like it or not, are we all dancing to Trump's tune?
You know, I would say that this moment is kind of like that gold medal hockey game where Canada's against the United States, and you are seeing Canadians come together and like actively root for the United States to lose. And this is the best time and the most exciting momentum to use to build that internal trade prospect and to build that domestic economy that Canada knows it's possible. I think, you know, we've already seen significant movements. I saw in the Logic today, former senior minister in Legault's government, Fitzgibbon, saying that Quebec could be open to an LNG project in Canada. And that is a real diversion from where we were, you know, 6 months ago, a year ago. So I think that the momentum is certainly there to remove those trade barriers. And I think that's the first step for Canadians to reactivate our economy. But I think more importantly, beyond Canada, is we have, you know, hundreds of other states that or countries that we can be negotiating agreements with. We have a lot of untapped market potential when it comes to the African continent. We started a little bit of that work last year, but we've never really gone to it to full extent. We have a collaboration agreement with the European Union. I think that could be strengthened. And we've already tapped into Asian markets. There's a lot of potential for Canada. It's just about activating it and reorienting our own minds away from the United States.
And to you, Mel, and let me be blunt, you know that interprovincial trade barriers have been an issue for so long. And I'm just curious to get your read, you know, the idea that now that we've averted a trade war, at least for now, there may be less urgency, you know, that unless there's actually a trade war that's going on, you know, just the threat isn't enough to start really making effective change on bringing down those barriers and getting rid of some of the, you know, protectionism that's out there.
Oh, I think that the threat is enough. I think I agree with Sabrina that this tone shift has been massive. And politicians across the country are going to be taking advantage of that and moving quickly to change the regulations that we need to change, to repeal bad pieces of legislation like federally Bill C-69, which is the Anti-Pipelines Act. That needs to go. We need to change regulations to cut red tape to make Canada more competitive. We need to make massive investments in our Arctic for national security reasons, and also to invest in infrastructure to connect it to the rest of the country for sovereignty. We need to invest in ports and rail and pipe. We need to leverage our quantum industry, our AI industry. Canada is actually a world leader in quantum technologies and in AI, and we need to keep investing in that to hold that position. And to the point about trade deals, we should be negotiating CANZUC, the Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK trade agreement. But you know what all of this requires? Requires Parliament to be sitting, requires people to be back in the House of Commons voting on changes to legislation and voting to pass budgets so that we can spend money to do these things.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but back to you, Sabrina. Is that likely to happen? I mean, we had the Minister McKinnon on earlier in the show, and he said, no, Parliament's not going to come back early.
I mean, listen, it's so interesting to hear so many Conservatives talk about how great Parliament is when they spent the last 4 months of the last session stalling every piece of legislation that came before them. So I'm not sure the value that I believe the value of Parliament today from the mouths of Conservatives, but I don't think it's going to happen before the end of the prorogation scheduled for March 24th. And I think that a lot of work can get done outside of Parliament. And I think a lot of that work has to be done with the premiers, which is almost the #1 goal, right? Like making sure that as we break down the internal trade barriers, that premiers are talking to each other, that premiers are all on the same page with the federal government, and that we're all swimming in the same direction.
And 30 seconds left for you, Najud. Are we at that point? Are we ready to try and hack through some of those trade barriers now, given the threat, and moving forward?
Well, I think politicians have a little bit of political cover because of the threat that U.S. tariffs pose to actually go ahead and knock some of those down. The Internal Trade Committee, which oversees the internal trade free trade agreement in Canada, is supposedly putting together some recommendations for first ministers to begin taking down those barriers. So we'll just have to wait and see whether there's going to be like previous rounds of addressing this issue, or whether there will be actual real momentum for some of this to be taken down.
Najud Al-Malih joining us, Sabrina Grover, as well as Melanie Paradis. Hey, great to see all three of you again. Thanks for taking time for Power Play today.